Aisha Carter stood by the large penthouse window on Manhattan's Upper East Side, the June 2012 afternoon sunlight streaming through the glass, highlighting her smooth brown skin. At 28, she gently placed her hand on her 8-month pregnant belly, feeling the gentle movements of the 3 lives growing inside her. 3 heartbeats, 3 miracles. Aisha, once a promising environmental engineer at MIT, had given up her PhD dreams to support her husband, James Whittaker, a 32-year-old white businessman with piercing blue eyes and perfectly groomed blonde hair. He was the CEO of Whittaker Industries, a startup on its way to becoming a multi-million-dollar powerhouse, thanks in no small part to Aisha's relentless work in strategic consulting and managing environmental initiatives. She smiled, thinking about their future, a family of 4, warm evenings together, vacations in Cape Cod like James had once promised. Isaiah, she whispered, trying out the name she had chosen for their firstborn. Strong, classic, like your father. Aisha imagined James lighting up when she proposed the name, the way he once held her hand during their first ultrasound when the doctor detected 3 heartbeats. His joy that day had made her heart tremble. The sound of the front door opening cut through her thoughts. James's footsteps echoed across the hardwood floor faster than usual, lacking the warmth she was used to. She turned around, her radiant smile ready, only to vanish instantly at the sight of his face. His blue eyes, once lit up whenever they saw her, were now cold, emotionless. He stood at the living room's threshold, hands in his pockets, his gaze sliding past her as if she were a stranger. "We need to talk," James said, his voice flat, stripped of the warmth that once stirred Aisha's heart. She stepped forward, one hand still on her belly, trying to keep her voice soft. "I was thinking about names for the babies. Isaiah for the oldest. What do you think? Or maybe I'll pick a few more and we can decide together." James cut her off, his gaze finally meeting hers, but it was sharp as a blade. "Aisha, I've hired a lawyer. I want a divorce." The word divorce exploded in her head. Aisha stepped back, arms protectively wrapped around her belly, as if shielding her unborn children from the storm that had just struck. "James, what are you saying?" she whispered, voice trembling. "We're about to have 3 children. Our family." James let out a cold laugh, the sound slicing through the air. "Family. Aisha, do you think I want to be tied down with diapers, crying, and sleepless nights? Look at you." His eyes traveled over her from head to toe, full of contempt. "You're no longer the brilliant, ambitious woman I fell in love with. You're a regular mom, Aisha. Boring, predictable. You're not right for me anymore." His words were like knives to her heart. Aisha felt her chest tighten, but she forced herself to stay calm, searching for the James she once loved, the one who held her during long nights, who promised a shared future. "James, you don't mean that, do you?" she said, her voice breaking. "We planned these children together. We built Whittaker Industries together. If you're stressed, we can work through it. Tell me, what's happening?" He turned his face away, avoiding her eyes. "It's Emily," he finally admitted, his voice cold but resolute. "She's 22, Aisha. She's ambitious and energetic and doesn't hold me back with all this." He gestured toward her belly as if the 3 children, the miracles they had awaited, were nothing more than a mistake. "A burden?" Aisha whispered, tears starting to stream down her face. "James, these are our children. Your children. How can you call them that?" James walked into the bedroom and pulled a suitcase from the closet. He began packing, folding his expensive shirts with cold, calculated precision. "Emily gives me what you no longer can. Freedom, excitement, a future not weighed down by family obligations. He paused and looked at her again, eyes devoid of regret. Aisha, you were once a brilliant scientist. Now you're just a mother. I don't want to live a mediocre life. Aisha stepped forward, her hand trembling as she reached out to him, as if touch alone could pull him back. James, please. We can fix this. The babies will be born in a few weeks. You can't walk away from them, from me, like this. He avoided her hand, a flash of disgust crossing his face. Don't, Aisha. Don't make this worse. He zipped the suitcase, the sound as sharp as a sentence passed. I've made my decision. This is my path. James walked to the desk and pulled out a personal checkbook. He scribbled quickly, handwriting firm, then tore the check and tossed it to the floor before her. $200,000. Consider it my final contribution. You have 48 hours to leave this apartment. My lawyer will be in touch. He took a document from his leather briefcase and placed it on the desk. I've signed away my parental rights. Those children are your responsibility, not mine. Aisha stared at the check on the floor, the amount mocking her. $200,000, the price to erase her and the children from his life. She collapsed to her knees, not to pick it up, but because her legs no longer held strength. You can't just sign away your children, she whispered, her voice shattered. They are your blood. I can, and I did, James replied, checking his watch as if she were merely a delayed meeting. Emily's waiting for me. I've booked a suite at the Four Seasons until you're gone. As the door closed behind James, Aisha sat on the floor, cradling her belly, tears falling silently. The image of James holding her hand during the ultrasound, smiling with joy, dissolved like a dream. But amid the pain, a small flame began to burn. She looked down at her belly, feeling the gentle kicks of Isaiah, Elijah, and Naomi. I won't let you be hurt, she whispered, her voice trembling but firm. We'll get through this, I promise. She stood up, wiped her tears, and picked up the check, not because she wanted it, but because she knew she would need it to survive. In that moment, Aisha Carter, the woman who once gave up her dream for love, decided she would never again let James define her worth. One day, he would have to face what he abandoned, not just her, but the three angels growing inside her. Aisha Carter sat on the worn-out armchair in her new apartment in Harlem, the dim light from the ceiling bulb casting shadows on the brown stains on the wall, like a map of broken dreams. The small apartment, just 400 square feet, with windows that rattled every time the subway passed, was all she could afford after leaving the penthouse on the Upper East Side. The $200,000 James Whitaker, her ex-husband, had thrown on the floor like a cold farewell, combined with her modest savings from her MIT days, was now dwindling. At 28 and 8 months pregnant, Aisha knew she only had a few months before everything fell apart. She stood up, strolling across the room, one hand cradling her heavy belly. The occasional contractions made her wince, but she forced herself to focus on finding a job. Over the past 2 weeks, Aisha had gone to 5 environmental consulting interviews, hiding her pregnant belly under loose coats and shielding it with a folder. But each time, the recruiter's eyes lingered longer on her stomach than on the resume that once bore the prestige of MIT. We need someone who can start immediately, without maternity leave, a middle-aged man said, his eyes drifting over her with doubt. Aisha could feel the unspoken prejudice. A black, visibly pregnant, single woman didn't fit the professional image they were looking for. I can start right away, she replied firmly. But the familiar response always came. We'll be in touch. She returned to the apartment, her legs aching, her heart heavy. Rent, medical bills, and the upcoming costs for 3 children kept her up at night, crunching numbers that never added up. But Aisha wouldn't let herself collapse. She looked at the box, holding her unfinished master's thesis on renewable energy storage, placed in the corner of the room. "Just get through this phase," she whispered to herself. "I'll find my way back." On a frigid February night, while Harlem lay under a snowstorm, Aisha awoke to a sharp, wrenching pain. She gripped the edge of the bed, breathing deeply, realizing the time had come. "Not yet, babies," she whispered, as if she could delay the moment. But the contractions came faster, more rhythmically. With trembling hands, she called a taxi, grabbing the bag she had prepared. A simple fabric tote with a few baby clothes and her documents. The taxi driver, a middle-aged man with a thick Brooklyn accent, glanced at her in the rearview mirror, worried. "You okay, sweetheart? I don't have those kids in my cab." Aisha tried to smile through the pain. "I'll try," she said, gritting her teeth as another contraction hit. "3 babies," she added, making the driver step harder on the gas through the snow-covered streets. At Harlem Public Hospital, Aisha was rushed into the delivery room amid chaos, machines beeping, nurses shouting, and the cries of other newborns. She gripped the bed rails tightly, but no one was by her side to hold her hand or wipe her sweat. "Just you and me, babies," she told herself, eyes shut tight through each wave of pain. After 16 hours of struggle, Isaiah was born first at 2:17 a.m., his loud cry a declaration of life. Elijah came 7 minutes later, quiet but perfect, his dark eyes wide open. Naomi, the smallest, arrived at 2:38, her tiny hand gripping Aisha's finger tightly, as if to say, "We did it, Mama." The night nurse, a black woman with a gentle smile, asked, "Want me to notify the father, sweetheart?" Aisha looked through the nursery glass, where her 3 angels lay in their tiny hospital bassinets, swaddled in blankets. "There is no father," she said, her voice bitter but steady. The words felt like a wound, but also a declaration of independence. 3 weeks later, Aisha returned to the apartment, holding Naomi while Isaiah and Elijah slept in the old crib she had bought from a second-hand store. The cramped room smelled of formula and echoed with a leaking pipe. She turned on the TV, keeping the volume low so the babies wouldn't wake, and her heart stopped when James's face appeared on the screen. He stood at a charity gala, his arm around Emily's waist, his confident smile unchanged. The headline below froze her breath. Whitaker Industries CEO announces engagement to former model. Radiant, in a glittering gown beside James, Emily embodied everything Aisha no longer had. Freedom, youth, a life unburdened. Aisha turned off the TV, tears streaming down her cheeks. She held Naomi tighter, feeling her daughter's small breaths. "He replaced us," she whispered, her voice broken. But in the darkness, Aisha felt a shift as Isaiah began to whimper in his crib. The pain was no longer just agony. It became fuel. She stood up, walked to the corner, and pulled out the box with her thesis. Those pages, once abandoned when she shelved her dreams for James, now felt like a reminder of who she used to be. She opened the first page, grabbed a pen, and wrote firmly in the margin, "One day, James Whitaker will regret leaving us." That promise wasn't just for James, but for herself and her 3 children. Aisha looked out the window, where the city lights shimmered through the mist. Harlem, with all its harshness, would be where she began again. She didn't know how, but knew she had to. For Isaiah, Elijah, Naomi, and herself. Aisha Carter sat in her small Harlem apartment, the weak light from a desk lamp illuminating the worn pages of her old master's thesis. It had been 3 months since she gave birth to Isaiah, Elijah, and Naomi. 3 angels, now the center of her universe. The room, cramped and noisy, with the rumble of subway trains outside, had become where she began to find herself again. At 28, Aisha, a black woman who had once given up her PhD dreams at MIT for her ex-husband, James Whittaker, was trying to reignite the flame of scientific passion that had long been extinguished. Her life had become a series of endless days. During daylight hours, she cared for her 3 children, changing diapers, feeding, soothing to sleep, with military precision to ensure each was equally cared for. At night, once Isaiah, Elijah, and Naomi finally drifted off, Aisha would begin her remote, virtual assistant job she had found on a job site. The work paid only $10 an hour, just enough to cover the electricity and part of the rent. But the $200,000 from James and her savings were depleting faster than she had expected. Aisha knew she needed a long-term plan to survive and build a future for her children. While preparing formula for Naomi one morning, Aisha heard a gentle knock at the door. Mrs. Rosa, her Puerto Rican neighbor in her 60s, stood with a plate of still warm empanadas. "Girl, you need to eat to keep your strength up," Mrs. Rosa said, her warm smile easing Aisha's fatigue. Mrs. Rosa, a widow living alone, had become an unexpected friend since Aisha moved in. "Could you watch the kids for a bit? I need to run to the store," Aisha asked. Mrs. Rosa nodded immediately. "You fed my soul with that chicken stew the other day. Now I return the favor," she said, waving as Aisha tried to thank her. Mrs. Rosa's help gave Aisha precious pockets of time. One night, after the children had fallen asleep, Aisha opened her laptop, the only valuable possession she had kept from her former life. She scrolled through scientific articles on renewable energy, a field she had once loved. In 2012, clean energy was booming in the U.S., fueled by Obama-era tax incentives and a growing demand for sustainable solutions. Aisha read about the solar energy storage problem, how current battery systems were inefficient and used toxic materials. Her master's thesis focused on a carbon silicon battery with a nanostructured design, had once been praised by Professor Patel at MIT as potentially revolutionary. But she had shelved it to support James's Whittaker Industries. She opened the thesis, the pages covered in notes written in her handwriting 4 years earlier. Rereading them, Aisha felt a spark in her mind, as if the ambitious young woman from MIT was returning. "I can still do this," she whispered, looking at Naomi asleep in the crib, her tiny lips curved in a dreamlike smile. She began updating the research, stealing moments during the children's naps. She read scientific journals, joined online engineering forums, and proposed new ideas for improving battery efficiency. One night, as Harlem was drenched in heavy rain, Naomi grew fussy and refused to sleep. Aisha carried her back and forth in the living room, softly singing a lullaby her mother used to sing. At that moment, an idea struck her between the sound of rain and her daughter's cries. "Hierarchical nanochannel structure," she murmured, eyes lighting up. She placed Naomi in the crib and grabbed a pen and paper, quickly sketching a new battery structure that could increase storage efficiency by 37% compared to current technology. Her heart pounded. This wasn't just an idea, but a real opportunity. The next morning, with Mrs. Rosa's help, Aisha called her former advisor at MIT, Professor Patel. "Aisha Carter," he exclaimed on the phone, "I thought you'd disappeared from the world of science." Aisha smiled, warmed by the familiar voice. "Professor, I've been busy, but I have a new idea for energy storage. I think it has potential." She briefly explained the carbon silicon structure, and the silence that followed made her nervous. Then he said, "Aisha, if you're right, this could be a breakthrough. Please send me a detailed draft. I'll take a look." That call was like a gust of wind, reigniting Aisha's inner fire. She began working with greater intensity, making use of every quiet moment. Mrs. Rosa became an essential support, watching the kids for a few hours each day so Aisha could research and write. "Girl, you're a warrior," Mrs. Rosa once said, watching Aisha type one-handed while holding Elijah. Aisha laughed, but inside, she felt deep gratitude. Without Mrs. Rosa, she couldn't have come this far. One evening, with Isaiah and Elijah fast asleep, and Naomi gazing at her with wide, curious eyes, Aisha opened an article about an upcoming clean energy conference in New York. She realized that if appropriately presented, her technology could attract investors. But that thought came with fear. "Am I competent?" she asked herself, remembering James's words. "You're just an ordinary mom, Aisha. Boring." She clenched her fists, pushing that memory away. "No," she whispered, looking at her 3 children. "I am more than that, and I'll prove it." Aisha opened her thesis and added a new line in the margin. "For my children, I will make this dream real." That promise, written in the dim light of a Harlem apartment, wasn't just a goal. It was the flame that would guide her through the darkness toward a future she and her children truly deserved. Aisha Carter sat in her small Harlem apartment, the glow from her laptop highlighting her face, casting light on her brown eyes filled with determination. Isaiah, Elijah, and Naomi, now 4 months old, slept peacefully in the worn-out crib beside the kitchen table. It had been 6 months since James Whitaker abandoned her, and 4 months since she gave birth to her triplets alone at Harlem Public Hospital. At 28, Aisha, a black woman once considered a rising star at MIT, now stood before her first real chance to change her fate, a clean energy startup competition in Brooklyn with a $5,000 prize. But to participate, she had to overcome barriers of time and a deeply wounded self-confidence. Her call with Professor Patel, her former advisor at MIT, a month earlier had rekindled a fire within her. "Aisha, your carbon silicon battery idea could change the energy industry," he had said, his voice full of excitement. "Please send me the draft. I'll help you refine it." That draft, written during sleepless nights between the cries of 3 infants, became her greatest hope. With its hierarchical nanostructure, her battery promised to increase solar energy storage efficiency by 37% and reduce production costs by 22%, using more environmentally friendly materials. In 2012, as companies like SolarTech and GreenVolt fiercely competed to dominate the renewable energy market, Aisha's idea was a rough diamond waiting to be polished. But preparing for the competition was anything but easy. Aisha continued her remote virtual assistant job, typing through the brief sleep windows her children allowed, earning just enough to cover rent and formula. Mrs. Rosa, her Puerto Rican neighbor, became a lifeline, agreeing to watch the babies for a few hours each day so Aisha could focus on her presentation. "Girl, you've got talent the world needs," Mrs. Rosa said, placing a plate of warm cornbread on the table. "Now, go out there and shine." Aisha hugged her, silent tears falling. Rosa's support was more than time. It was the belief Aisha needed to push through days of self-doubt. Aisha spent 2 weeks perfecting her presentation, rehearsing in the mirror while holding Naomi, fine-tuning every figure to ensure clarity and impact. She knew she'd face seasoned judges and competitors from prestigious universities or well-funded startups. As a single black mother, she could already sense the skeptical stares that might await her, just like those that had followed her during job interviews. "I cannot afford to fail," she whispered, watching Isaiah line up a toy puzzle with perfect order. The night before the competition, Aisha didn't sleep. She sat at the kitchen table, watching her children sleep, weighed down by anxiety. Entering the competition required a $250 registration fee, a large sum when her bank account held less than $2,000. She remembered James's words. "You're just a regular mom, Aisha. Boring." That line still cut like a blade, making her question whether she had the strength to stand on stage and face doubtful eyes. But then she remembered Naomi, gripping her finger in the delivery room as if to say, "Mama, we can do this." Aisha opened her laptop, reviewed her presentation one last time, and added a new line in the margin of her thesis. "For my children, I will not give up." On the morning of the competition, Mrs. Rosa arrived early with a homemade flan. "For a bit of luck," she said, hugging Aisha. Aisha wore the only professional dress that still fit, a navy blue outfit she had bought in college, now a bit tight but still presentable. With her 3 babies in Mrs. Rosa's care, she took the bus to the Brooklyn Convention Center, clutching a folder with her thesis and presentation materials. At the conference, Aisha immediately felt out of place. Most of the competitors were white men, or teams from startups with funding, chatting confidently, and exchanging business cards. She stood in the corner, setting up a simple display, a poster board with data, and a small battery model she had built herself. "Who's this mom?" she overheard someone whisper, tone laced with doubt. Aisha clenched her fists, pushed away the shame, and focused on her goal. When her turn came, Aisha stepped onto the stage, her heart pounding. She took a deep breath, looked out at the audience, and began. "My name is Aisha Carter, and I'm here to present a solar energy storage system that can increase efficiency by 37%, reduce costs by 22%, and be environmentally friendly." Her voice, shaky at first, grew stronger as she presented her data, explained the nanostructure, and emphasized the commercial potential. In a world that needs clean energy more than ever, this technology isn't just progress, it's a revolution. She finished, and the room applauded, not thunderously, but enough for her to know she had done well. 3 hours later, when the results were announced, Aisha stood frozen as her name was called. Second place, $3,000. Not first, but a huge victory nonetheless. She nearly cried as she accepted the check, thinking of Isaiah, Elijah, and Naomi. A middle-aged woman approached her, Lena Morgan, a well-known investor in clean energy. "Your presentation was impressive," Lena said, handing over a business card. "This technology has potential, but I need to see commitment. Are you willing to mortgage your apartment to invest? I'll cover the rest." Aisha gripped the card, heart racing. Mortgaging her apartment meant putting her children's future on the line. She thought of cold nights in the shabby apartment, Isaiah crying from hunger, and Naomi's trusting eyes. "I'll do it," she said, voice steady. "For my children, I'm ready." Back in Harlem, Aisha held her 3 children close that evening, feeling their tiny breaths. The $3,000 would cover 2 months' rent, but Lena's offer was a door to a much greater future. She looked at the thesis on the table, the handwritten notes like reminders. She was not just a mother. She was a scientist, a fighter, and a woman building her empire. Aisha Carter stood inside a small production workshop in Brooklyn, the scent of metal and molten plastic rising from the active molding machine. At 29, she, a black woman once abandoned by her ex-husband James Whitaker while pregnant with triplets, was now the founder of Carter Energy Solutions, an ambitious clean energy startup. Isaiah, Elijah, and Naomi, now 10 months old, were at home with Mrs. Rosa, the Puerto Rican neighbor who had become her indispensable support. With $3,000 from her second-place finish at the startup competition and initial funding from Lena Morgan, Aisha had mortgaged her Harlem apartment to bring her carbon silicon battery dream to life. But the road ahead was anything but easy. The workshop, only 200 square meters, was where Aisha worked day and night alongside two young engineers. Malik Johnson, a black electrical engineer from Caltech with an optimistic smile, and Sofia Alvarez, a materials specialist of Mexican descent from Stanford. Malik adjusted the circuit for the battery prototype, pushing his glasses up his nose. "We're almost there, boss," he called out. "This battery's gonna make SolarTech nervous." Aisha smiled, but deep down, she knew the real battle had just begun. 6 months earlier, in 2013, America's renewable energy industry was booming thanks to government incentives and the rise of startups like GreenVolt and SolarTech, giants with millions in venture capital. Aisha's battery technology, offering 37% efficiency and 22% lower production costs than the industry standard, posed a serious threat. Lena Morgan, a sharp investor, had contributed $50,000 for 30% equity, but demanded proof that the technology could be commercialized. "You have a great idea," Lena had said at their first meeting, "but the market doesn't wait. SolarTech is watching every startup like yours." The first sign of success came faster than Aisha expected. Customers swarmed in after installing her battery prototype at a Brooklyn cafe, a solar-powered phone charging kiosk. "They came to my shop because they could charge their phones for free," said Javier, the cafe owner. "When can I get another one?" Word spread quickly. Within a month, 3 local businesses, a bakery, a gym, and a bookstore, signed contracts to install similar kiosks. The revenue was modest, but enough to pay Malik and Sofia, who accepted lower salaries because they believed in Aisha's vision. But the joy was short-lived. One morning, as Aisha arrived at the workshop, she received an email from Lena. "SolarTech just announced a new battery system with specs similar to yours. We need to act now." Aisha reread the message, heart pounding. She checked the article on SolarTech's website. 35% efficiency, 20% cost reduction. And her stomach dropped. "They copied our design," she said to Malik and Sofia, voice trembling with anger. Malik frowned. "How'd they find out?" "We only revealed it at the competition." Sofia shook her head. "Maybe someone leaked it, or they have industry spies." Aisha remembered the startup competition, how a middle-aged man from SolarTech had approached her after her pitch, asking sharp technical questions. At the time, she had assumed he was just curious, but now she had doubts. "She said they want to crush us before we get too big," clenching her fists. Lena called shortly after, her tone calm but firm. "I've hired a legal team to defend your IP," she said. "But Aisha, you need to prove this technology is yours. If we lose everything." The pressure weighed heavily on Aisha. She thought of Isaiah, Elijah, and Naomi, growing up in the cramped apartment she had mortgaged to chase this dream. If SolarTech won, she wouldn't just lose the company and her children's home. After the babies were asleep that night, Aisha sat at the kitchen table and opened her master's thesis. Notes from 2009, when she was still a student at MIT, were proof that this idea was hers. She photographed every page, sent them to Lena's lawyer, and added one more line in the margin. "No one is allowed to steal our dreams." The next day, Aisha gathered Malik and Sofia at the workshop. "We're going to accelerate production of the second prototype," she said, her voice firm. "This battery has to outperform what SolarTech just announced. We're going to prove they're nothing but copycats." Malik nodded, eyes lighting up. "I'll optimize the circuitry to boost efficiency to 38%. Sofia added that I can improve the carbon coating to reduce degradation. Give me 3 days." Aisha looked at them, feeling the bond that had formed between them. "Thank you," she said, voice choked with emotion. "We're not just doing this for ourselves. We're doing this for the future." Over the next 2 weeks, the team worked non-stop. Aisha split her time between the workshop and home, grabbing 30-minute naps when the kids slept. Mrs. Rosa served hot meals, tamales to black bean soup, and cheered them on. She said, "You're changing the world," placing a hand on Aisha's shoulder. "Don't stop." The second prototype was completed on time, with 38% efficiency and superior durability. Aisha sent the data and the old thesis notes to Lena as evidence. Lena's lawyers filed a copyright infringement claim against SolarTech, and the news spread quickly throughout the industry. SolarTech withdrew its battery announcement a week later, claiming it had only been preliminary research. Aisha exhaled deeply, but she knew this was only a small victory. "They'll be back," Lena warned. "You need to be ready." That night, Aisha returned home, holding Isaiah, Elijah, and Naomi close. She told Mrs. Rosa about the victory, and the older woman beamed. "Girl, I told you, you're a warrior." Aisha looked at her children, feeling a renewed fire inside her. Carter Energy Solutions wasn't just a company. It was the legacy she was building for her children, the proof that she was not dull, as James had once said. She opened her thesis and wrote a new line. "We've started, and no one will stop us now." Aisha Carter stepped into her small Harlem apartment, her legs aching after a shift at Joe's Diner. The smell of burnt coffee and toast from the kitchen still clung to her hair. At 29, Aisha, a black woman once abandoned by her ex-husband James Whitaker while pregnant with triplets, was now the mother of Isaiah, Elijah, and Naomi, 3 15-month-old toddlers growing faster than she could keep up with. At the same time, she was the founder of Carter Energy Solutions, a clean energy startup gradually making its mark in Brooklyn. But between these two roles, Aisha felt a deepening crack inside her, a growing fear that she was trading her children's childhood for her dream. The apartment, though cramped, felt warmer now with Isaiah's finger paintings taped to the walls and an old rug gifted by Mrs. Rosa. Aisha set the grocery bag on the table, hearing giggles from the bedroom. Mrs. Rosa, the Puerto Rican neighbor, was playing peekaboo with the 3 toddlers. "Mommy's home," Aisha called, and Isaiah, Elijah, and Naomi immediately came toddling out, their little feet thumping across the wooden floor. Isaiah, beaming, hugged her legs. Elijah clung to her hand. Naomi, the smallest, raised her arms to be held. Aisha knelt, embracing all 3, breathing in the scent of baby powder and formula. "Thank you, Rosa," she said, looking at the older woman with heartfelt gratitude. "Don't thank me," Mrs. Rosa waved, holding a plate of banana bread she had made earlier. "You feed me, and I watch the kids. Fair deal." She left, and Aisha was alone with her 3 angels, now competing to tell stories in their baby babble. Isaiah pointed proudly to a toy he had sorted by color. Elijah tapped on the table, mimicking the beat of a TV jingle. With her wide eyes, Naomi commanded her brothers with a pointed finger and a firm "Go!" Aisha laughed, but her heart was heavy. She had only a few hours with her children before she would have to return to her laptop to work on Carter Energy Solutions. To make ends meet while the startup was still unstable, Aisha worked as a waitress at Joe's Diner from 5 a.m. to 1 p.m., 6 days a week. The job was exhausting, but the tips helped pay the electric bill and buy baby supplies. After work, she would come home, change diapers, feed the kids, play with Isaiah, Elijah, and Naomi, then squeeze in startup work during their naps. With 3 contracts from local businesses, Carter Energy Solutions had begun generating small revenue, but the legal battle with SolarTech had drained nearly all of Lena Morgan's investment. Aisha knew she had to accelerate progress, not just for the company, but for her children. One evening, after the kids finally fell asleep, Aisha sat at the kitchen table and opened her laptop to revise a technical report for Lena. But her eyes drifted to a photo on the table, her and the triplets at the park, smiling brightly under the sun. Am I missing their childhood? She wondered, remembering how Isaiah had called Mommy. That morning as she left, his eyes silently pleading for her to stay. Guilt surged in her chest, tightening her breath. She closed the laptop, walked into the bathroom, and sat on the cold tile floor, tears streaming down her cheeks. I can't do this, she whispered, her voice breaking. I can't be a good mom and run a company simultaneously. A soft knock pulled her from the dark. Mrs. Rosa stood at the door in her bathrobe, concerned. Sweetheart, I saw your light was still on. What's wrong? Aisha wiped her tears and forced a smile. It's just, I'm scared I'm not good enough for them, Rosa. I work all day and study all night. I don't have time to play with them. Mrs. Rosa sat down beside her, taking her hand firmly. Aisha, you're building their future. They feel your love. I see it. I know how Isaiah lights up when you come home, and Naomi clings to you like she never wants to let go. You're a fantastic mother. Don't doubt that. Her words were like a wind blowing away the fog. Aisha hugged her, strength slowly returning. Thank you, she said, voice thick with emotion. I don't know where I'd be without you. Mrs. Rosa smiled. You'll make it, because you're a fighter. Now go to bed. You've got a world to conquer tomorrow. The next morning, Aisha woke with renewed determination. She made breakfast for the kids, tiny pancakes Isaiah loved, and played block-stacking games before heading to work. At Joe's diner, she eagerly dashed between tables, smiling at customers despite her aching feet. A regular named Mr. Henry, a retired engineer, asked, Sweetheart, what do you do besides waiting tables? You've got the eyes of someone working on something big. Aisha gave him a summary of Carter Energy Solutions, and he nodded. If you ever need someone to check numbers, call me, free of charge. Aisha was touched, realizing that even in tough Harlem, people were always willing to help. That afternoon at the Brooklyn workshop, Aisha met with Malik and Sophia. She said we need a new prototype ready for next month's Clean Energy Conference. If we impress them, we might attract new investors. Malik nodded. I have an idea that could boost battery durability by 10%. Sophia added, I've found a cheaper recycled carbon source. It'll cut costs. Aisha smiled, feeling their solidarity. Thank you both. We're not just building for ourselves, but for everyone who believes in us. That night, Aisha returned home to find Isaiah stacking toys into a power tower like the ones she had described. Elijah sang a soft, garbled lullaby, while Naomi led her brothers using a wooden spoon like a wand. Aisha embraced them all, then read them a bedtime story. Once they were asleep, she opened her thesis and added another line. I won't give up, because you three are my strength. She looked out the window, the Harlem lights glowing through the night. Balance wasn't easy, but Aisha knew she was on the right path. Not just for her dream, but for her love for Isaiah, Elijah, and Naomi. Aisha Carter stood at the window of her small production workshop in Brooklyn, watching the rush of traffic beneath the golden glow of sunset. At 30, she, a black woman once abandoned by her ex-husband James Whitaker while pregnant with triplets, was now the founder of Carter Energy Solutions, a rising clean energy startup. Isaiah, Elijah, and Naomi, now 3 years old, played at home with Mrs. Rosa, her ever-reliable Puerto Rican neighbor and emotional anchor. After winning the legal battle with Solar Tech and securing her first contracts with local businesses, Aisha could finally see the light at the end of the tunnel. But this moment, when she received an email from the U.S. Department of Energy, marked her journey's most pivotal turning point yet. The email arrived early in the morning, just as Aisha was mixing formula for Naomi. Carter Energy Solutions was selected for a $500,000 pilot contract, and the subject line made her nearly spill the bottle. The contract involved installing her carbon silicon battery system in 3 small towns in New York as part of the 2014 National Clean Energy Initiative. Aisha immediately called her investor, Lena Morgan. "We did it, Lena," she cried, her voice trembling. Lena laughed through the phone. "I knew you would, but this is just the beginning. We need to scale production, fast." This contract wasn't just about money, it was validation. Proof that Aisha's idea, once dismissed by James as fanciful, had real value. 2014. The U.S. renewable energy sector accelerated, fueled by Obama-era policies promoting solar power and storage solutions. But competition was fierce. Giants like Greenvolt and SolarTech continued to expand. Carter Energy Solutions, with a team of just 5, Aisha, Malik Johnson, Sophia Alvarez, and 2 new engineers, had to prove they could play on the same field. Aisha used part of the contract money to buy a small apartment in Brooklyn. Not luxurious, but clean and safe. The condo had 3 small bedrooms, enough for Isaiah, Elijah, and Naomi to have their own space. She hung Isaiah's finger painting in the living room, placed Elijah's toy keyboard in the corner, and set up a little table for Naomi to command her brothers with colored pencils. "This is our home," Aisha said, hugging her children. Isaiah beamed, while Naomi declared, "My room is the prettiest." But the joy from the contract was soon tested by an unexpected headline. One evening, after the kids had gone to bed, Aisha turned on the TV to unwind. The economic news came on, and James Whittaker's face suddenly appeared, making her freeze. He spoke at an energy conference in Manhattan, announcing that Whittaker Industries would restructure, pulling out of the renewable energy sector due to unstable profitability. The ticker beneath the screen read, "CEO Whittaker Industries will focus on traditional energy." Aisha clenched her fists, memories of James's past insults flooding in. "You're just a regular mom, Aisha. Boring." He was now abandoning the very field she had bet her future on. She turned off the TV, her heart pounding. Part of her wanted to feel triumphant. James was failing where she was succeeding. But another part, deeper, still hurt. She remembered the early days of their marriage, when James held her hand and promised to build an empire together. "Why do I still care?" she whispered, eyes drifting to a photo of her 3 children on the table. She walked to the corner of the room, opened her master's thesis, and reread the handwritten line. "One day, James Whittaker will regret leaving us." But then she told herself, "I'm not doing this to prove anything to him. I'm doing it for myself and for my children." The next morning, Aisha met with Malik and Sophia at the workshop. "This contract will take us to the next level," she said. "But we need to double production in 3 months." Malik nodded. "I'll redesign the assembly line." Sophia added, "I found a carbon supplier in Queens. It's 15% cheaper." Aisha smiled, feeling their unity. "Thank you. We're building more than batteries. We're building a future." At home, Aisha played with the children and realized they were growing faster than she imagined. With his logical mind, Isaiah stacked blocks into a power station like the ones she had described. Elijah, sensitive to sound, sang a TV jingle with perfect pitch. Naomi, a born leader, organized her brothers into a game called Company, appointing herself as the boss. Aisha laughed, but her heart ached. She knew the new contract would demand more time, possibly keeping her away from them. "I promise I won't miss out on you," she whispered, kissing Naomi's forehead. One afternoon, Mrs. Rosa stopped by with a pot of black bean soup. "Girl, I heard your company got a big contract," She beamed. Aisha told her about the news segment featuring James, and Mrs. Rosa shook her head. He chose the easy road. You chose the right one. Don't let him shake you. Aisha nodded, feeling strength in her words. I won't, Rosa. I'm doing this for my children, not for him. That night, Aisha sat at the kitchen table, laptop open, preparing her report for the Department of Energy. She glanced at her thesis and wrote a new line. We've won the first battle, but the war is prolonged. For my children, I will see this through. The lights of Brooklyn shimmered through the window, reminding her that she was building an empire, not for revenge, but to affirm the worth of herself and her children. Aisha Carter sat on an old wooden chair in her small Brooklyn apartment, the desk lamp casting its glow on Isaiah's finger painting hanging on the wall. At 32, she, a black woman once abandoned by her ex-husband James Whitaker while pregnant with triplets, was now the founder of Carter Energy Solutions. This rising clean energy startup had secured a $500,000 contract with the U.S. Department of Energy. Isaiah, Elijah, and Naomi, now 5 years old, were preparing to enter kindergarten at a Brooklyn public school thanks to a scholarship from a local community program. But tonight, as the city lights shimmered through the window, Aisha faced a challenge greater than any contract, answering her children's long-awaited questions about the father she had hidden from them for 5 years. That day began like any other. Aisha woke at 4 a.m., made breakfast, pancakes with syrup, Naomi's favorite, and dropped the kids off at school before heading to the production workshop. With its small team of Malik, Sophia, and 2 new engineers, Carter Energy Solutions was scrambling to scale up production of its carbon silicon batteries after the federal contract. In 2016, the renewable energy sector was fiercely competitive, with companies like Greenvolt launching new products, forcing Aisha to work tirelessly to stay ahead. But she always carved out a few evening hours for her children between spreadsheets and technical diagrams. Isaiah, Elijah, and Naomi quickly began to show exceptional talents at kindergarten. With his oversized round glasses, Isaiah shocked his teacher by solving first-grade level addition and subtraction on the first day. This boy needs an advanced program, the teacher told Aisha when she came to pick him up. Elijah, with his sensitivity to sound, played Twinkle, Twinkle Little Star on the classroom toy piano, earning applause from the whole class. Naomi, her braids neatly tied, organized her classmates into a class council during playtime, assigning roles to each child. She's a natural leader, the teacher said with a smile. Aisha felt proud, but her heart weighed heavy as she brought the kids home. During dinner, chicken stew taught to her by Mrs. Rosa, Isaiah suddenly asked, "Mom, why don't we have a dad like Tommy in my class?" The question pierced like a blade, freezing Aisha's mid-chew. Elijah stopped drumming on the table, and Naomi looked up, waiting. Aisha set down her utensils, took a deep breath, and knew the moment she had dreaded had arrived. She had hoped the kids wouldn't ask about James until they were older, but Isaiah's curious eyes made it clear. There was no delaying anymore. She pulled up a chair and motioned for the 3 children to climb onto her lap. "My loves," she began, her voice gentle but firm, "your father's name is James Whitaker. He chose a different path before you were born." She chose her words carefully, not wanting to pass her pain on to them. He decided that his work and personal life were more important than having a family. That was his choice, not because you weren't lovable. Naomi, with the boldness of a little leader, asked, "He didn't want us?" Aisha felt her chest tighten. She remembered the day James had thrown a $200,000 check to the floor and called the children a burden. She said, "He didn't know how amazing you are," stroking Naomi's hair. That's his mistake, not yours. Elijah, more sensitive, looked down at his hands. Did he ever ask about us? Aisha shook her head honestly. No, sweetheart. Your father and I haven't spoken since before you were born. Isaiah, with his logical mind, declared, We don't need him. We have you. Naomi nodded, hugging Aisha tightly. You're enough, Mommy. But after the kids had gone to bed, Aisha sat at the kitchen table, her heart in turmoil. She had protected them from the painful truth about James, but could she hide it forever? She opened her laptop, intending to work, but her fingers instinctively typed James Whittaker into the search bar. The results appeared in a news article about Whittaker Industries struggling, having focused on traditional energy while the market shifted to renewables. She closed the browser, not wanting to be pulled back into the past. I don't need him to succeed, she whispered, looking at the photo of her 3 children on the table. The next morning, Mrs. Rosa stopped by with a plate of empanadas. Girl, you look tired, she said with concern. Aisha told her about the kids' questions, and Rosa took her hand. You were honest with them. That's the right thing. But don't let that man shake you. You are their light. Aisha smiled, drawing strength from her words. Thank you, Rosa. I'll keep going. For them. At the workshop, Aisha met with Malik and Sophia. We need to prepare for the Chicago Energy Conference, she said. If we impress them, we might attract major investors. Malik nodded. Our new battery just hit 39% efficiency. Sophia added, I'm testing a new recycled material that could cut costs by another 5%. Aisha felt their unity and commitment. She knew her team and community stood beside her on this journey. That evening, Aisha held a small celebration for her children, a pre-birthday party with a cake made by Mrs. Rosa. Isaiah proudly showed off his energy station, built from blocks. Elijah sang an original song. Naomi led a game called Company, appointing herself as CEO. Aisha hugged them tightly, then wrote into her thesis notebook, You are the reason I fight. We will shine together. The lights of Brooklyn sparkled beyond the window, a quiet promise of a brighter future ahead. Aisha Carter stood in front of the mirror in her small Brooklyn apartment, adjusting her navy blue blazer, the only business outfit she had owned since college, now tailored to fit her post-pregnancy figure. At 33, she, a black woman once abandoned by her ex-husband James Whittaker while pregnant with triplets, was now the founder of Carter Energy Solutions, a clean energy startup gaining recognition after a $500,000 contract with the Department of Energy. Isaiah, Elijah, and Naomi, now 6 years old, were playing with Mrs. Rosa in the living room, preparing for a fun weekend. But Aisha's mind wasn't in the apartment. It was already in Chicago, where she would serve as the keynote speaker at the 2017 Innovation in Energy Conference, a prestigious gathering of global leaders in the energy sector. One name on the guest list unsettled her: James Whittaker, CEO of Whittaker Industries, scheduled to speak on a panel. The invitation had arrived 3 weeks earlier, printed on thick, glossy paper, with the conference logo embossed at the top. Dear Ms. Aisha Carter, we are honored to invite you as the keynote speaker, the letter read, praising her carbon silicon battery technology as a breakthrough in energy storage. Aisha gasped joyfully when she read it, immediately calling her investor and advisor, Lena Morgan. This is huge, Lena, she said. If we make an impression, Carter Energy Solutions could attract international funding. Lena agreed, but added a warning. You'll be going up against giants like Greenvolt and SolarTech. And I saw James Whittaker's name on the panel list. That name made Aisha freeze. It had been 8 years since he threw a $200,000 check on the floor, called her children a burden, and walked out with Emily. She hadn't seen or spoken to him since. She had tried not to think of him, focusing on her children and her company. But last year's news that Whitaker Industries had exited renewable energy had reopened old wounds. The thought of facing James at the conference made her anxious and angry. "Don't let him distract you," Lena had said over the phone. "You're the star here, Aisha. He's just a side speaker." Aisha nodded, but that night, she dreamed of James standing in their old Manhattan penthouse, sneering, "You'll never succeed, Aisha. You're just a regular mom." She woke with a start, heart pounding, sweat on her brow, looking at the photo of her 3 children on the table. Isaiah with his logical smile, Elijah with dreamy eyes, Naomi radiating confidence. She whispered to herself, "I'm not doing this to prove anything to him. I'm doing it for me and them." But deep down, she knew a part of her did want James to see how far she had come. Not for revenge, but to erase the sting of the insults he had left behind. Aisha spent 2 weeks preparing her keynote speech, working with Malik and Sophia to finalize data on the 2nd-generation battery, now boasting 40% efficiency and double the industry's standard lifespan. In 2017, the global push for carbon reduction brought renewable energy into the spotlight, making her technology an industry focal point. She practiced in front of the mirror, adjusting every gesture to project the confidence of a leader, even as anxiety about James still stirred in her chest. "What are you doing, Mommy?" Naomi peeked into the room. "I'm rehearsing for a big conference," Aisha replied with a smile. Isaiah chimed in, "You're going to talk about batteries. I want to see." Elijah, dreamy as always, added, "You're going to be famous." Aisha hugged her children tightly, warmed but heavy-hearted. This would be her first time away from them for 3 days, her most extended separation. Mrs. Rosa had agreed to stay at the apartment to care for them, but the guilt still weighed on Aisha. "I'll call every night," she promised, stroking Naomi's hair. "And I'll bring back gifts from Chicago." Isaiah, ever logical, requested, "I want a model train." Elijah wanted a music book, and Naomi declared, "I want Mommy to win." The next morning, at the Brooklyn workshop, Aisha gathered her team. "This conference is our chance to go global," she said. Malik nodded. "New data is ready. Our battery outperforms green volts." Sophia added, "I made a 3D model for the presentation. It'll blow them away." Aisha smiled, feeling their unity. "Thank you, everyone. We're not just representing a company. We're representing a dream." The night before her flight, Aisha couldn't sleep. She finalized her slides, double-checking every figure and chart. She wondered how James would look at her. Would his gaze still hold the same contempt it did 8 years ago? Or would he be surprised to see her, a single black mother, now standing on the main stage? She closed her laptop, opened her old master's thesis, and read the handwritten line, "One day, James Whitaker will regret leaving us." Then she added another, "Whether he's there or not, I will shine." The next morning, Aisha kissed her children goodbye, leaving each of them a note. For Isaiah, a fun math puzzle. For Elijah, a lullaby she had written. For Naomi, a leadership quote. She gazed out the window on the flight to Chicago, feeling a new kind of peace. James might be there, but she was no longer the broken woman he left behind. She was Aisha Carter, founder, mother, and warrior, ready to face the past to shape the future. Aisha Carter entered the Grand Chicago Hotel, her heart racing as she saw the buzzing crowd in the conference lobby. At 33, she, a black woman once abandoned by her ex-husband James Whitaker while pregnant with triplets, was now the founder of Carter Energy Solutions, a rising clean energy startup known for its breakthrough carbon silicon battery technology. The 2017 Innovation in Energy Conference, the most significant event in the renewable energy sector, was her moment to claim the spotlight. Back home in Brooklyn, her 6-year-olds, Isaiah, Elijah, and Naomi, were with Mrs. Rosa, but Aisha felt their presence in every step she took. However, unexpected news at the registration desk made her pause. James Whitaker, CEO of Whitaker Industries, had canceled his appearance at the last minute due to scheduling conflicts. Aisha stood still, gripping her folder tightly. Part of her felt relieved. She wouldn't have to face James's condescending gaze, the man who once called her boring and referred to their children as a burden. But another part felt disappointed. She had prepared 8 years for the moment he'd witness her success. "It's okay," she whispered, taking a deep breath. "This is my stage, not his." She stepped into the main hall, eyes steady, ready for the most important speech of her career. The main auditorium had 800 attendees, including CEOs, investors, scientists, and policymakers worldwide. In 2017, the renewable energy sector peaked, with global climate agreements driving solar energy and storage investments. Despite its small size, Carter Energy Solutions had drawn attention after a $500,000 contract with the Department of Energy. But competition was fierce. Giants like GreenVolt and SolarTech had just announced new products. Aisha knew she had to shine to attract international investors. She walked onto the stage, the spotlight reflecting off her navy blazer. She drew a deep breath, and the images of Isaiah, Elijah, and Naomi flashed in her mind. Isaiah's logical smile, Elijah's dreamy melodies, and Naomi's fearless confidence. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice strong and resonant, "I'm Aisha Carter, founder of Carter Energy Solutions. Today, I present a solar energy storage system with 40% efficiency, 25% cost reduction, and sustainable materials. We are not just innovating, we are redefining the future of energy." For 20 minutes, Aisha presented like a seasoned leader, backed by data, charts, and a 3D model designed by Sophia. She shared her journey, not mentioning James, but emphasizing how the idea was born from sleepless nights beside her children. As she closed with the words, "The future doesn't belong to those who wait. It belongs to those who built it," and the auditorium rose in thunderous applause. Aisha stood still, eyes shimmering with tears, feeling the victory she no longer needed James to witness. After her speech, a crowd of investors gathered around her, offering business cards and partnership proposals. A director from a Japanese energy firm, Mr. Tanaka, said, "Your technology could transform the Asian market. We'd love to discuss collaboration." Aisha smiled, exchanging cards, her heart brimming with hope. She called Malik and Sophia back in Brooklyn, her voice bursting with joy. "We did it!" Malik laughed. "You just made GreenVolt nervous, boss," Sophia added. The 3D model worked flawlessly. Time to celebrate. That evening, in her hotel room, Aisha video called her children. Isaiah showed off a new math problem. Elijah sang part of a song, and Naomi shared a school plan she had invented. "Did you win, Mommy?" Naomi asked, eyes sparkling. Aisha smiled. "I did, but more importantly, I gave it everything I had for you three." She described the speech and felt joy ripple through the screen, connected to her children, despite being thousands of miles apart. Before bed, Aisha read an online article about Whitaker Industries. James's company was laying off staff, with shares down 10% due to its failure to pivot toward renewable energy. She closed the browser and, surprisingly, felt no triumph. "My victory doesn't need his failure," she whispered, gazing at the photo of her children on her phone. She opened her master's thesis and added one more line. Today, I shone for us, not for anyone else. Lying down, Aisha looked at the glowing Chicago skyline through her window. 8 years ago, she had been a desperate single mother in a run-down Harlem apartment. Now, she is the keynote speaker at the biggest energy conference in the world, leading a company with global reach. James may have been absent, but that no longer mattered. Aisha's glory was independent, not built on anyone's approval, but born from her strength and love for Isaiah, Elijah, and Naomi. Aisha Carter stood on the grand stage of the Plaza Hotel in New York, the spotlight illuminating her deep crimson gown, a symbol of strength and rebirth. At 41, she was no longer the black woman once abandoned by her ex-husband, James Whitaker, while pregnant with triplets. She was now the founder of Carter Energy Solutions, a $4.7 billion clean energy company. Tonight, at the 2025 Green Tech Awards, she was honored with the industry's most prestigious recognition, the Sustainable Innovation Award, for her revolutionary carbon silicon battery technology. In the front row sat Isaiah, Elijah, and Naomi, now 13, their proud eyes fixed on their mother. But this moment turned historic when Aisha spotted James Whitaker a few tables away, now the CEO of a declining Whitaker Industries, his face pale upon seeing her and the children. The awards ceremony was the most significant event in renewable energy, gathering CEOs, officials, and investors worldwide. By 2025, global commitments to carbon reduction had accelerated. Aisha's technology, now achieving 45% efficiency and using recycled materials, had helped cut millions of tons in emissions, putting Carter Energy Solutions on par with giants like Greenvolt. Aisha knew James would attend. The guest list Lena Morgan had sent her confirmed it, but she didn't expect his presence to stir so many emotions. Not hatred, just the calm of someone who had already overcome her past. When the host, a former U.S. Senator, introduced Aisha, the room erupted in applause. She stepped up to the podium, her gaze pausing momentarily on James. He looked older than his 45 years. Thinning hair, sunken eyes, the weight of Whitaker Industries' 40% stock plunge visibly etched on him. Aisha drew a deep breath and began. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Aisha Carter, a single mother, a scientist, and a fighter. 13 years ago, I was abandoned while pregnant with triplets, called boring and worthless. Today, Carter Energy Solutions has offset emissions equal to 12 million cars, created over 4,200 jobs, and signed a $1.2 billion contract with the U.S. government. The crowd applauded again, but Aisha raised her hand, her voice turning sharper. Tonight, I want to introduce the 3 people who inspired this journey. Isaiah, Elijah, Naomi, please stand. Her children rose. Isaiah, with round glasses and an analytical gaze. Elijah, with the demeanor of an artist. Naomi, with the poise of a leader. A murmur rippled through the audience as they noticed the uncanny resemblance between the boys and James. The blue eyes, the angular features. Aisha turned her gaze to James, voice calm yet razor sharp. And this is James Whitaker, the man who signed away his parental rights to my children, who once believed my only value lay in how useful I was to him. The room fell silent, like the air had been sucked out. James turned pale, clutching his wine glass, panic in his eyes. Emily, his wife, sat frozen beside him, her fake smile unraveling. Aisha continued, I hadn't planned this, but fate has its arrangements. Isaiah, Elijah, Naomi, this is James Whitaker, your biological father, a man who never once tried to know you. Isaiah stepped forward. scanning James with logic in his eyes. "Mom, who is he to us?" he asked. Not angry, just curious. Aisha placed a hand on his shoulder, pain flashing through her. "He's the man who chose to leave us before you were born." Naomi, bold as ever, stepped up. "Why didn't you ever try to find us? Weren't you even curious?" James opened his mouth, but only a whisper escaped. I was wrong." Elijah, the most sensitive, looked at James, his voice soft. "Are you sad that you never got to know us?" James rose to speak, legs trembling, but Lena Morgan, now chairwoman of Carter Energy's board, blocked his path. "Let them finish," she said, her voice icy. Aisha led her children off the stage into a private room. She embraced them tightly. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way. James is your biological father, but he chose to leave. It's up to you whether you want anything to do with him." Naomi shook her head. "I don't need him now. We have you." Isaiah nodded. "Maybe one day, but not today." Elijah, eyes red, whispered, "I want him to know how amazing we are." Aisha returned to the ballroom, finishing her speech with unshakable confidence. She accepted the award, flashbulbs erupting from the press. James left early, shoulders slumped, avoiding all eyes. Aisha watched him go, not with satisfaction, but with liberation. She had achieved justice, not through revenge, but by living true to her worth. That night, she wrote in her thesis, "Today, we face the past, and I am proud of my children, and proud of who I've become." Aisha Carter stood before the towering window of her 58th floor office at Carter Tower, gazing over the Manhattan skyline, glowing beneath the sunset. At 41, she was no longer the black woman once abandoned by her ex-husband, James Whitaker, while carrying triplets. She was now the founder and CEO of Carter Energy Solutions, a $4.7 billion clean energy company operating in 17 countries with 4,200 employees. 1 week after the 2025 Green Tech Awards, where she had confronted James and publicly introduced Isaiah, Elijah, and Naomi as living proof of her strength, Aisha finally felt deep and complete freedom, not because of James's downfall, but because she had built a legacy far greater than the pain of her past. The morning after the awards, Aisha's phone overflowed with notifications. The Wall Street Journal ran the headline, "Carter Energy CEO faces the man who abandoned her while pregnant with triplets." Photos of Aisha and her radiant children on stage were placed beside images of James leaving the Plaza Hotel, gaunt and hollow-eyed. Whitaker Industries lost 68% of its stock value before the market opened. By noon, the board announced an emergency meeting to reconsider James's position as CEO. Aisha skimmed the article but felt none of the vindication she once thought she'd crave. "I don't need his failure to win," she whispered, setting the phone down. That afternoon, an unmarked cream envelope arrived at her office. Inside was a handwritten letter, James's shaky penmanship. "Aisha, I've lost everything. My company, my reputation, Emily. But the most significant loss was you and the children 13 years ago. I don't expect forgiveness. I need you to know that I see it now. You proved me wrong about everything." Aisha read the letter calmly. No anger, no pity, just closure. She placed it in her desk drawer and didn't reply. James was no longer part of her story. That evening, Aisha returned to her 3-bedroom apartment in the Upper West Side, which she had bought after Carter Energy secured a significant investment 2 years earlier. Isaiah, Elijah, and Naomi, now 13, were preparing dinner together, a cherished family tradition. Isaiah, ever the logical one, measured the ingredients for the pasta with the precision of a young scientist. Elijah, the artist, sang a self-composed jazz tune, his fingers miming piano keys in the air. Naomi, a born leader, orchestrated the kitchen like a general. "Mom, my tomato sauce is the best," she declared, waving her spoon. Aisha sat at the dinner table, pride swelling in her chest. She said gently that we needed to discuss what happened at the awards. The children paused, turning their full attention to her. "How do you feel about James?" Naomi, as direct as ever, shrugged. "I don't need him, Mom. We have each other." Isaiah nodded. "One day, I'll want to ask him some questions, but not now." Elijah, more sensitive, spoke softly. He looked sad. "I don't know if I should care." Aisha reached for their hands. "I'll support whatever you choose. If one day you want to meet him, I'll be there. But remember, your worth isn't tied to him or anyone else. You are amazing because of who you are." Naomi hugged her tightly. "You're the most amazing person we know. We're proud of you." Isaiah added, "And proud of your company too." Elijah smiled. "You make batteries. I make music. We're a team." Their laughter melted away any lingering tension. Aisha thought of the 13-year journey, from that crumbling apartment in Harlem, where she once cried alone beside 3 newborns, to Carter Tower, now the symbol of the empire she had built. Carter Energy Solutions had just signed a deal to supply battery tech to 30 countries, making her the youngest black woman ever honored by Forbes as the Green Queen. But her true legacy wasn't in figures or titles. It lived in Isaiah, Elijah, and Naomi, children raised in love, resilience, and brilliance. Later that night, Mrs. Rosa, now 70, dropped by with a flan tray. "Girl, I saw you in the papers," she exclaimed. "Harlem is proud of you." Aisha hugged her tightly, grateful for the years of quiet support. "You're part of this journey," she said. Mrs. Rosa waved her off. "I just watched the babies. You're the one who changed the world." After the children had gone to bed, Aisha sat at her desk and opened the thesis she'd carried through her darkest days. She penned the final line. "We built an empire, not for revenge, but to live in truth. Thank you, my children, for being the light of my life." She looked at the Manhattan night, Carter Tower glowing like a lighthouse. James may have lost everything, but Aisha had found it all: freedom, family, and a legacy that would endure.